This is Kyle Hunter and Elijah Fleming with Don't Mean Nothing. We're here with Alex Moore, Marine Corps veteran. Alex, we appreciate you having us out here and making us feel at home at your place. Alex is a Fallujah veteran, did 8 years in the Marine Corps, and we're looking forward to hearing more about his story and his background.
Yeah, first off, thanks for reaching out and actually you guys coming out here and actually hearing my story.
Yeah, anytime, man. So let's start with childhood. Where'd you grow up? What was your early life like?
So my early life was is interesting. I was born in New York and kind of bounced around, lived in Southern California in couple different places. My dad worked for Amtrak, so he moved around and we kind of bounced around. So I ended up settling as far as where I grew up is in Southern California. So like Riverside, San Bernardino, Redlands area.
Okay. And were you into any sports or anything as a kid?
So I was not at first, I tried playing football and like grade school, like middle school-ish, and that just didn't interest me all that much. And then it took until I got to high school, like my sophomore year, I started wrestling. And then I was like, okay. Though I wasn't an avid wrestler at first, it took me a while to get into the grappling arts. My attendance was kind of piss poor to start off with. So it took me a while to kind of get into grappling, and grappling is a source of enjoyment. But by the time I got into my senior year and kind of figuring out all that stuff I wanted to do, and I found myself on the wrestling team, and then eventually my focus rapidly shifted from wrestling to wanting to be in the Marine Corps.
How was your relationship with your parents?
So my parents divorced when I was 11. It was interesting. Just kind of put that in perspective. It was an interesting time. I ended up living with my dad. It was, watching the custody battle and all that stuff, and not to disparage either of my parents, but a lot of misrepresentation of what I was told. And some things weren't the way they were painted to be. And it took me a little bit later in life to kind of understand all that. So,
did you end up with your mom, your dad?
I ended up with my dad. Joined the Marine Corps, living with my dad. My mom was there, made sure she signed off on the delayed entry program forms and all that stuff. So, yeah.
So you were in high school when 9/11 happened?
I was.
And do you remember where you were? And
yeah, so I was one of those weird kids that did ROTC. I know, weird. I did ROTC, and I was actually there for a color guard practice. And the sergeant major and the colonel were like, hey, we're under attack. And I'm just kind of out of sorts, and I was watching it on TV. And from that point on, because I had already knew I wanted to join, from that point on, I was like, I'm joining the infantry. And
why the Marine Corps?
the easiest answer is like, why not? Honestly, it was a prestige. Like, a lot of it's the prestige. A lot of it's the resilience within yourself. A lot of it is, it's hard to have that eagle above an anchor. And it's, you could be in any other branches and you're a part of that branch, but you're in the Marine Corps, you're a Marine. And there's a significant distinction globally to that fact is you are a Marine. Being out for over 12 years at this point, like, you're still a Marine. And everyone knows that you're a Marine. You think different, you look different, you act different, you're a Marine. And everyone knows. And that was a big part of why I joined. And originally, obviously, the idealist in me was like, I'm going to do my 20 years. Like an idiot. Not to any of my friends out there who's doing 20 plus years, but it wasn't for me. So, but still, you're still that person. You're still a Marine. It's still that defining feature. Like, you made it.
Was there something that specifically that sparked your interest in the Marines? Like, do you remember seeing maybe somebody in dress blues, or was there something that stands out?
Not necessarily. The recruiters would come by the high school all the time. I had already known, thanks to my mom, that I wanted to join the Marine, or not the Marine Corps, but the military. but it was just, it was where I was supposed to go. And it wasn't necessarily like, join the Army or join, like, I knew I needed to go to the Marine Corps. Once I kind of figured out what the branch was, I knew that's where I needed to be.
So you joined the Marines. When do you leave for basic training? You're 18 at that point?
Yeah, so kind of uniquely, like, I turned 18 a few days before I graduated high school, which was probably not the best thing for me because I stopped going to school for a little bit. It was at the end. Who cares? Tennis was like, woo! Anyway. Yeah, so about 27 days after I turned 18, I was standing on the yellow footprints in San Diego.
What do you remember from basic training? Funniest story.
Oof. I don't know that it was really all that funny. Like, we had a lot of mess up stuff happen when I was in recruit training. And I don't want to say mess up in a, like, it was just unique because I was kind of sterile to any of that environment. Having people necessarily be up my ass for everything I did that's obviously unique. You're like, what is this? Right? But I don't think I had anything particularly funny happen to me in boot camp. It was just more like, I guess, funny, not funny, haha. I did fracture my knee in recruit training, fractured actually through my knee. It's really hard to do, but you can do it. I know. Yeah, so I guess the funniest thing, I guess if you want to quantify that as funny, like, I was out there and I had messed up my knee during the Crucible. I was right behind my senior drill instructor. He shoved a kid and we ran right over him, which is probably terrible, but more like funny, right? We're running and, like, I step on him, I feel a twinge. I'm like, okay, this is fine. Completely bypass it. Saying we're on Camp Pendleton. So I'm, like, not paying attention to it. It's fine. I'm like, I'll just drink more milk. It'll be okay. It'll buff out. It doesn't. So we get back to San Diego. We're getting ready for final drill. We're doing close order drill, rifle manual, all that stuff. And senior's pissed. So we get put in the pit, and we're doing mountain climbers. And I'm doing them, and I feel all this tension build up in my knee, building, and it sounds like a shotgun goes off. I'm standing from, like, me to you, where I'm actually on my hands and knees, from me to you to my drill instructor, and I look over, I'm like, and he's looking at me like, I'm like, oh, that's not good. And now I can't move my leg. I'm like, funny, because I want to laugh because this is, like, terrifying. Like, this is, oh God, like, what's happening? My knee's shattered. Like, my knee's fractured. But yeah, so I think that would be my funny And anyway, and what happened was my knee, like, it grew. Like, instead of just being my normal knee, there was like a honeydew or like a cantaloupe sitting on my knee. So we're doing our medical stuff, and they're like, what do you need? Blah blah blah. We need to go to medical, and I'm just, you need to go. I was like, yeah. So then end up doing a bone scan and all that stuff, and they're like, yeah, you pretty much, it looks like a stress fracture by this point, because I was like, I'll just drink more milk. But yeah, it's stress fractured from, like, probably mid to upper part of my thigh all the way down to mid shin.
So they have to pull you out of training and all that? Did you have to go back and do it again?
Nope.
Okay.
So I ended up going from graduating boot camp. I had to go back, and I had to stay there until I could pass a PFT. Well, by the time I graduate and all that stuff, I stopped using my crutches, because why not? That sounds like a solid idea. Go right to weight bearing right before the doctors tell you. Yeah. So I did that, and I get there. They're like, "You're supposed to be on crutches." I'm like, "I feel fine." So I wait for about a few more days. They're like, "Hey, can you pass a PFT?" And this is the fastest PFT run, the 3-mile run I've ever done in my entire career. I never did one any faster. Everything else is much slower. But I ran 3 miles in 19 minutes and, like, change.
What does PFT stand for those that don't know?
Physical fitness test. So it was the standard Marine Corps pull-ups, sit-ups, 3-mile run. And yeah, I ran that 3 mile run in like 19 and change. I was like, I gotta get out of here.
So did you miss the ceremony of like getting the Eagle Globe and Anchor at the end? It's at the end of the Crucible, or is that?
No, so when I went, it was at Family Day. I don't know if that was like a day before. I think it was the day before graduation, but that's when I got my Eagle.
How did that feel for you?
I was a little upset at myself because originally I was a squad leader, and granted, it doesn't necessarily matter in the grand scheme of things, but I would have liked to have led the squad, at the time. But I was at the back of the formation, and then did I feel like I got cheated out of it? No, but I would have liked to have, been in the position I was at originally, but it is what it is.
I mean, as far as the pride associated with getting that.
It was relieving. It wasn't necessarily like I felt overwhelmed or anything like that. It was more relieving. Like, okay, you've made it. What's next? And, I had this deterministic view. I was like, I'm going to get to the war. I was like, I got to get this thing better so I can get to the war. So it was really easy for me to just sit there and, hey, I need to get, I got my Eagle and Anchor. I'm in. Sweet. What's next? I got to hit my next checkpoint. Hit that next checkpoint. And like, what's next? What's next? What's next?
So what was next?
Getting that knee healthy and then going to SOI.
What was SOI like?
Not good. I went a little too early. My knee wasn't doing good. I wasn't a strong hiker at the time. And then my first class of SOI, I ended up midway through, like most of the other guys there, getting pneumonia. Yep. Got pneumonia, got put in the hospital for a few days, ironically, right before Thanksgiving. And then I got told I can go home for Thanksgiving, but, I just had gotten out of the hospital for which I was in the hospital for 4 or 5 days. Yeah. So did that, went to another class. And then they said they needed 4 machine gunners to go to Hawaii. I was like, I'll go to Hawaii. Which they all, all the instructors were like, you're never going to go to Iraq. I was like, sure, whatever. I was like, they don't know anything. Like, obviously, an 18-year-old kid, like, no one knows anything else, but you know everything, of course. So, yeah, I volunteered to go to Hawaii. And then, sure enough, I get to Hawaii and later go to Iraq. Ta-da. They were right. No, I'm kidding.
So you get to Hawaii, and then how long after do you get your orders to go to Iraq?
So we were slated to go on the 31st MU. So they were planning like a unit deployment program or UDP, and we're going to hop on the MU. No biggie. MU's not going to do anything. We're going to go float around the Pacific. Whatever. I was like, okay. At the time, Colonel Ramos, he had connections to the Pentagon, so he was already playing the board to get us to Iraq. I didn't know that at the time, but, piecing it all together, he knew what he was doing. It's like, all right, cool, we'll get on the MU. Get on the MU, get to Okinawa. We're there for a month-ish. Get on ships, and then we're sailing to Kuwait. He pulled it off. Getting orders, hey, 1st Battalion, 3rd Marines with the 31st MU, you guys are going, boom, going to Kuwait. So we disembarked in Kuwait on, oddly enough, September 11th, 2004, and it is hot. I mean, hot. You're running. We were driving off the LCU, or the landing craft, and it was so weird in my mind. That was like, why is everyone passing out waters like this is a marathon? And then we start sitting and waiting for our ride because we had to drop off the Humvees. And I get it because it's 140 on the beach.
Wow.
Yeah.
What did you know about the landscape of the war at that point? Had you heard anything from guys coming back, or are you just walking in blind for the most part?
So I was fascinated by it. So between having my 2 SOI classes, I knew a couple of guys and all that stuff, and I kept looking at the Marine Corps Times to see KIAs. And friend after friend after friend was getting killed in Iraq. So I took the time to kind of understand geography and all that stuff. I wasn't prepared for how sandy Kuwait was, but I knew that Iraq was pretty flat and, you know, obviously you had some dunes and stuff like that and some wadis and all that stuff, but I wasn't prepared for it to be as urban in some areas as it was. I knew Baghdad was relatively urban, but everything else was, I was kind of expecting this weird, like, suburban, like, huttish style, but I wasn't expecting Fallujah to be how it laid out to be.
Were you excited when you found out that you were going to be going?
I was nervous. Extremely nervous, actually. I was like, okay, we're going. I'm like, okay. Shit, we're going. Like, that's kind of the feel. It's like, okay, we're going. We'll be fine. We'll be fine. Shit, we're going. And then, like, that's kind of the cycle of thought that was going on. It's like, okay, I got to do my part. I hope everyone else does theirs. And yeah.
Talk us through that fear before you you get over there. I mean, just, is it something that's keeping you up at night, or is it something you're kind of suppressing?
It's something that you kind of have to bury down. You got a group of dudes waiting on you, like, you know, you're supporting them, they're supporting you. Like, you don't have the opportunity to sit there and, like, really dwell in it. It's, if I dwelled in it, or I stayed in that moment, or in that, like, mindset of, okay, is this everything, where we've done everything right, or, like, am I prepared, then I'm letting, you know, my driver, my team leader, my, you know, the corpsman that was in my vehicle, like, I'm letting all those guys down. And weirdly enough, like, not to take anything away from, you know, the line company guys, but vehicle stuff is unique, because, like, you were in that group of 4 or 5 people, and that is your group of 4 or 5 people. Like, you guys all have to support one another 100% of the time.
So you're MOS, like your job, you're a machine gunner?
I was, yeah.
So what, and I know we had talked about this a little bit earlier. Can you walk the audience through what your assignment was with the being in a vehicle, being in the turret?
Yeah. So Marine Corps is really, really unique as far as machine gunners, because you don't just learn how to use, like, the M16, the 249, or anything like that. You don't learn just those 2 weapon systems. You learn, at least for machine gunner specific, you learn the 240, the Mark 19, which is 40 millimeter automatic grenade launcher, and then the M250 cal. Like, you learn those 3, and those 3 are your discipline. Those 3 are your bread and butter. So I went to a weapons company, you know, weapons company 1-3. Sad to say that unit is no longer with us. But I was in a weapons company. I was in a CAT platoon, so a combined anti-armor team. And I was in the CAT Lights, or CAT 2, which we called ours. And we're just comprised of machine gunners and anti-tank assaultmen. And our whole job there was convoy security, route screening, battalion level reconnaissance, reinforcement, QRF, like, whatever they needed us for. Coordinate search, coordinate knock. We dismount from time to time. Like, so we didn't just have the job of, like, hey, I'm going house to house. Maybe it's going house to house one day. Next day I'm supporting LAR or light armor reconnaissance, and I'm on foot. Or the next day I'm like, hey, I'm doing this route recon. It's like anything and everything in between.
So when you get to Kuwait, how long are you there before you actually get into Iraq?
So we land in Kuwait on September 11, 2004, and then we don't leave, we don't depart to go into Iraq until October 11th. So we're there for a month. We're doing a lot of convoys, a lot of training in the middle of the desert, which they had, like, all these convoy routes and stuff like that, getting us prepared to do this long 3-night road march up to Camp Fallujah, and ultimately up to Al Asad Air Base.
And then after you got into Iraq, how long from the time you crossed over until, you know, how long did it take for you to actually start seeing combat? When was your first engagement? So
we had a weird engagement on our second night driving up, and I wasn't a part of it. It was more like the lead vehicles. They had engagement. I wasn't part of that one. But it wasn't until we had dropped everything off and had headed back to Camp Fallujah, and then we decided not to sleep in the tents. And we're sleeping on our vehicles, and a rocket shoots over our head into one of the tents that we were probably going to be staying at. Yeah.
Wow.
So that was like, okay, this is real. This is really real. And I mean, I think it was like 1 o'clock in the morning, something like that, and just a rocket screaming overhead. And all of us are trying to find some bit of earth to get cover.
Were you asleep when that started?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that happens. Does your mindset shift at all between the day before and that day? I mean, obviously it's pretty early on.
Yeah, I mean, you end up having that nice little pucker factor. You go from 0 to 100 real quick, like they say, like the kids say these days. It's not so much a mindset shift as it becomes real. Like the mindset, it's still there. It's just like, oh, now this is really real. Like there's a reality, there's a finality to all of this that we're doing. Like this is legitimately life and death. And it's oddly simple in that aspect. And a lot of people don't really talk about how simple life can be, especially in combat, but it gets oddly simple. There's no worry about like bills and phones and, you know, your girlfriend, where the hell she's doing. Like none of that matters. Here, now, in the present. How are we dealing with this problem right here? And it's oddly enough, it's one of those weird things. Like I find myself as a vet and just saying like, I miss the simplicity, and I miss that simplicity in that specific area because it's nice. There's no more. I got to figure out my mortgage. I got to figure out and all that stuff. It's live or die.
So take us through what happens after your night with the rocket.
So after the rocket attack, shortly after, we move into the other side of Camp Fallujah. So there's one side where it was like you had the chow hall, and then you had all this infrastructure, chow hall, PX, all this other stuff, cigar shop, which that's a nice place to go to. Not knowing that you're going to go get cigars while you're there, but sometimes it's nice to have a cigar. So you have all the pleasantries on one side, and then we moved to the other side, which eventually got named Camp Slocum. And we were over at Camp Slocum, which is like these old, I guess you would call it a barracks. It's, you know, the windows are gone and all that stuff, but it's these concrete buildings which we end up staying and kind of operating out of somewhat. But that's where we end up pushing the battalion to.
And what's your day-to-day like?
At first, we didn't really do much. Like I would just, you know, every now and then we pull watch on the vehicles, and you know, because we all had everything had ammo in it at that point. Pull watch on the vehicles, prepping equipment, making sure your stuff's good to go, and then that's really about it. You know, you go to chow, come back.
So was going into Fallujah even on your radar at that point?
I didn't even know about Fallujah before we even before I even said anything about it. Like, I was like, well, Fallu what? And like, it just wasn't this thing. It didn't exist. And then, you know, obviously going there now, like, it lives. And obviously it's, you know, there's that weird picture someone wrote years and years ago that Fallujah will be a part of you forever. And I mean, it couldn't be more than truth. You're there. You're never gone per se. Like, it's always gonna be a part of who I am.
So as a sidebar, before we get into the Battle of Fallujah itself, between what you just said about Fallujah being a part of you and the simplicity of combat and you missing that, what do you think helps your mind now stay level and just not, because I feel like that'd be something that you'd be consistently missing, that like both the rush and the change and just not having all the outside noise and What do you do now to keep yourself stabilized?
I'm really good at compartmentalizing a lot of stuff. It's actually kept my mental health really, really significantly in check. But my fun time is I train and compete in jiu-jitsu. There's a odd simplicity there that is beautiful. I need to fight this guy that's trying to choke me, or like even being able to have like make jokes in the moment of you training jiu-jitsu. It's like that's all that matters right there is training. That's it. And everyone's pretty much like-minded. It just ends up being a really good time.
And what do you think that's done for you, jiu-jitsu? I mean, because obviously you know that I've trained, but people that are watching this might not have, in the past, and maybe they're thinking about it or whatever. Maybe that they're vets. I've always loved it. I've always thought it's been very calming, and it helps you keep your mind present throughout the rest of your day after you train, at least for me.
Yeah.
So what has it done for you?
It's given me an outlet, and kind of drifting towards a Sebastian Younger type deal. It's like it helps you find a tribe. That's what I've noticed. A lot of guys, you get out, and you're like, okay, I've had all my buddies, we're all real tight, and all of a sudden you go back home, or you move and you do whatever else you're doing in your life, and then you don't necessarily have that tribe go along with you. And jiu-jitsu gives you that tribe. That's one thing right there. Like, you have a bunch of like-minded dudes who are there wishing you your absolute best, which is really strange at times because most guys are kind of like, screw you most of the time. But this group of dudes who really wants you to like train, keep training. Sure, they might want to choke you, but they want you to do your best. They want you to grow. They want you to progress. They want to see you cross that finish line, whatever that may be. Whether you set a goal and you're like, hey, I want to be a black belt by 50, or you're like, I just want to train and roll. Like, I just want to be better in the craft. Cool. There's a bunch of dudes there that just want you to do that. So that's one of the biggest things. And it gives you a focal point. And that's kind of one of the things like I chose to compete. I mean, I think I've done like 8 or 9 comps at this point. I chose to compete, and it gives me clarity. Like, I have something to work towards. I do this. I guess I'll point out the elephant in the room. I am a police officer, so this does help me in my job as far as like keeping safe. And yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, I always think it's really cool how it's almost like a art form in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
Just because of how difficult it is to realize that like you can't just force your way through things. And the same applies with life, right? Where you go to the gym and it's like you roll with somebody and you're basically moving off of their body, like using their weight or their pressure or whatever. And it helps you flow through that process, and it becomes much more like natural and present, right?
Yeah.
And I feel like when you translate that to what's happening in your life on a day-to-day basis, it's like something could happen that you might get super stressed out about under normal circumstances. But because you're actively training, it helps it just flows through, and you know that it's going to get handled, and you just figure it out. It's like a much more, like you said, like simple, but also like it has that flow to it that I always think is really translatable.
Yeah, you also get this little bit better presence of mind. Like, you look at everything in like your day to day, like, you kind of qualify it as far as like, everything has a volume to it, and being present is, obviously here on this left-hand side for me. And you just leave it there. Everything else while you're training just turns down. And you're like, okay, well, none of this other stuff mattered. It never mattered. We give, and it's weird because we always, human nature is we always assign values to different things. And sitting there going like, okay, well, this stupid little thing where this guy cut me off 20 minutes ago because he was in a rush. Maybe he had to take a dump, who knows? He's in a rush, and I'm just trying to go to the gym. Like, does that really matter? Does that need to take up that bit of bandwidth that I have? Like, no. So, over here, the presence of mind aspect is like, I get to be here. And I should be very happy that I'm here because I'm training. I'm doing fun things. I'm learning something. I'm learning a tangible skill, whether it could be very limited in scope, like who's going to berimbolo someone on the street? Nobody. But if I wanted to learn how to do it, I could, right? I do like berimbolos, just so you know. Just clarifying that for everybody. Everyone knows what a berimbolo is. I do like that, right? So like having all this other stuff that's going on, like you're able to kind of understand that, and everything else, combat wise and all that stuff, like those have a lot of parallels, and that's why people like Weedify, like that's why I affiliated with them when I was getting into training. It's like they helped me get to that point. They helped me get to the place I wanted to be, but end up linking me with other people, like getting into this tribe, this bigger, more nationalized tribe of people that want me to do my best. So it's I'm not here on my own I'm just being me, living my life. It's like, okay, all these other people are here, everyone's supportive, everyone's nice. It's gives you that clarity, like you said, and you end up reaching that, so to speak, that flow state, and it makes all the small stuff, the bullshit, seem what it really is, and that's unimportant.
Yeah. I also think it's hard to see from the outside looking in, but when people watch, people roll or whatever, it looks like it's very controlled. Mm-hmm. But jiu-jitsu is a violent sport, man. You can do some brutal shit to people in jiu-jitsu, and I think there's a beauty in that too, right? Where it always looks like very intricate watching it as like a spectator, but if something were to happen and you needed to use it someday, like it'll take care of business, what I mean?
Yeah.
So I love it in that aspect, and the competition aspect I think is awesome. I've had coaches. Anthony Pacini was our coach in Chicago, and he used to always just tell us, if you're at a comp, you're going to act like that guy's trying to kill you.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, whatever submission you're doing, you don't take it lightly, because that guy's competing. Like, break his fucking arm, or whatever it is. It's just very real, very violent, and I think there's an aspect of it that helps with everything you're talking about, because it's calming and it centers you, but it's also something that, if it goes wrong, like you get really fucked up, so I love that too.
Yeah. And we kind of always had this mindset when I was training with my coach Colby. It's comp, like, it is what it is. It happens.
Right.
Like, you're in a comp. This is the comp. This is 100% live. This is one of the rare places in life where you're going 100%. So shit happens. His arm gets broken, and like, you should have tapped. Like, and then there's like a weird level of responsibility where it's like, I need to do this and you need to do that. And it's like, okay, if you want to tap early, you can tap early. There's nothing wrong with that. But, you don't want to tap and you end up tearing your ACL, or, get your elbow kind of messed up because you didn't want to tap to a Kimura attempt. Like, hey, it is what it is, man. It's a violent, beautiful sport, but it's still violent.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm working heavily on my cauliflower at this point, so it's like, it's still pretty violent.
Absolutely. And the tribe aspect, I think, is cool to talk about too, because there's so many veterans that I've talked to that have disconnected entirely from the people that they served with. And I just think that it's crucial. We talked to Chris Ranhel recently, he runs a veteran militia, which is a group of vets that'll get together. And if you want to do any activity, they will give you their name to make a team for whatever. If you want to start a softball team or do anything with any group of guys, they'll help support that effort. And I think if anybody's watching this that doesn't have that, or doesn't have a tribe of men, because men need that, right?
Yeah,
we need other guys to do shit with. I just think it's crucial. So I think that's really important to talk about.
Yeah, it's keep it simple. Is like, guys need guys to do guy shit with, and it's just, what can be more guy shit than trying to choke your buddy?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
minus the hold my beer. Like, what's more guy than choking your friends? You know what I mean? Like,
All right. Well, we got the sidebar. I really like that conversation. I love talking that stuff because it's been a part of my life for so many years, you know, off and on. And it's like just a little spark of like going like to the gym with you today is enough for me to like go home and just want to do nothing but that again, you know. And I don't know, like we make excuses all the time, or like, you know, life gets in the way, you get busy, whatever. But it helps, like just going once in a while helps you realize how important it is to carve out just that extra couple hours to do.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, that was a great time. I really appreciate it. So let's get back to Camp Fallujah. So now you're, when do you find out that you're going to be heading in there, or how do they let you know?
So we started doing some feints. So kind of like the fake attacks where we're kind of going in the city, but we're not going in the city, kind of limited scope type attacks. We did a couple at night, and then we ended up having this giant regimental combat team size briefing with General Natonsky giving us a mission. Now, granted, I'm little Lance Corporal me, like I'm way in the back. I can't hear anything. I couldn't hear anything in the first place. I was like, whatever. Like, what are we doing? What? You know, it's like teachers in the front talking, and you're like none of that, right? So we end up getting the, you know, obviously the broken down order from my Lieutenant Stansbury, who's a colonel still in the Marine Corps. Oddly enough, I got to see him again after 20 years at the Semper Fi Fund's Battle of Fallujah reunion, which was amazing. Yeah, it was amazing because I still see him as Lieutenant Stansbury, even though he's Colonel Stansbury now, and it's just like it's beautiful. Anyway, still see him as that second first lieutenant. I'm like, God, this guy, right? But he ends up giving us a briefing. We end up getting told what we're doing, and I think shortly thereafter we end up going in the city. You know, we were doing some operations out in the Zhejiang province and all that stuff. So doing some things here and there, but not really like going into the city yet. I think somewhere, and I don't remember the exact day where I got mortared, but we were working out of Zhejiang supporting Alpha Company, and you know, kind of a little quick story about this is we're sitting out there and we're kind of just doing our, you know, cordon area and all that stuff, just kind of working. Alpha Company's checking some houses, and I'm sitting on the road. I got another Humvee in front of me that my buddy Young was in. And we're just sitting there, and I just happened to look down the dock. Thankfully, we like that day, for whatever reason, we got these Kevlar blankets. We were like, maybe we should put these up in this like these gaps that we had for these doors. Well, sure enough, I look down at dock. I'm like, hey man, we've been here for too long. My driver, my team leader, Glenn Miller, he's wearing headphones that came with the radio that we stole from the Army. We didn't steal it. And we got from the Army that we required. He's wearing those, and my section leader, Jed Poulter, he's out with the guys, you know, dismounted. Look down at the dock, hey man, we've been here for too long. He's like, yeah, we have. Boom! Mortar lands in the ditch 10 feet from my vehicle. Peppers the side of my vehicle. I end up taking a little bit of shrapnel in the face. Glasses save my eyes, but my rounded turret becomes a tuning fork. And I lose 30% of my hearing in my left ear like that. Like, boom, gone. So I'm kicking Glenn. I'm like, dude, we gotta get the fuck out of here. And he's like, what's going on? Why is all this dirt falling on me? And Sergeant Poulter, he's running up the hill, and he looks like he's trying to run like, you know, trying to get over the hill as fast as he can. And it looks like he's running like Shaggy and Scooby-Doo. Like his just legs are moving and he's not going anywhere. And I am trying not to laugh, but I find the humor, and I try to find the humor in most things. And I'm like, let's fucking go, dude. Like, and he's there like running. So he ended up getting the vehicle, and it's like, we can't go forward because we think we have a potential IED in front of us. So we end up backing up, and then we get back down to the pump house where we were working out of. And yeah, then, like I said, a few days after that, we ended up getting a brief from General Natonsky and all that stuff. But yeah, we were doing some operations outside the city prior to.
So do you want to show your helmet really quick? I know that the top of the helmet.
Yeah, this is the helmet I wore when I was in Iraq. Don't ask me how I got it. So all this little peppering, all this damage that's on the top here is from that mortar. So a lot of this stuff, some of these cuts here I had because I had things tied into it, but all this peppering on the top here, this is where my IR patch was. It kind of got ripped off, but all these little small marks across from here, across here. That's what took the brunt of that 62 millimeter mortar.
So right after that, you said a few days you get the briefing. What was it? And that was the one you couldn't really hear.
Yeah. So we get our briefing, and Lieutenant Sainsbury's telling us like, "Hey, this is what we're doing," and all that stuff. So we're like, "Okay, cool." So we end up setting up on the outside of the city, and then we're just literally like, probably the most crazy thing I've ever seen in my entire life. Like we have 4 battalions online, and we're just on the edge of the city. Like they had sent out leaflets and all this other stuff to the town, and like telling them like, if you're Mujahideen or you're freedom fighter or whatever you want to call yourself, like we're going to be here on this day on this time, be here. And it's legitimately like the schoolyard bully coming for a fight. Like we did not care about anything else. And funny enough is I was talking to a buddy of mine who was he was a first sergeant in Bravo Company, but he works at First Meth now, and he was telling me like that is probably one of the more simpler orders that has ever been issued throughout, and it's one of the ones that everyone looks at as far as commander's intent. This is the example, and it's super simple. On order, kill or capture insurgent population. Easy enough. Like, there's no room for like, maybe not. Like, if you're insurgent, kill or capture. The end. I was like, okay, cool. So, getting through all that, like it's, we got the order, we're sitting there, battalions online. They're shooting MIG-clicks, we can see the light show. Funny, like you see things on like movies, and like Hamburger Hill, you can see the tracers this way, tracers coming back. To see that in real life was just like, wow. Like now I'm seeing like 240 saws, M16 shooting tracer back, tracer back. You're like, okay. MIG-clicks dropping, multiple lines of C4 to clear lanes to get into the north part of the city. Like they're breaching train tracks, they're doing everything. And eventually, we're out there in the middle of the night. We set up next day, probably about 11 o'clock, we're in the city. And it's like everyone had cleared out. Even the fighters had cleared out. And like we're there, and it's eerie. Like there's fighting, you could hear it, you could hear troops in contact all the time, but it's empty. And it's like this almost like dystopian view of a city. Like there's no one there. Like there's people there, but there's nobody there.
Weird.
Yeah.
So tell the audience, for people that don't know, what a MIG-click is.
So a MIG-click is a mine clearing charge. So there's a rocket attached to a line of C4, and it's a couple 100 pounds worth of C4 that they shoot off of an amphibious assault vehicle or an AAV. They shoot it from the back of an AAV, shoots up, clears, and then as soon as it lands, fairly shortly after, it blows and clears a safe path for you to travel.
Wow. So all this is happening that night. You said so they're shooting back at you guys too while this is all going on.
Yeah.
Okay. And when you roll into the city, was it the next day, or was it?
Yeah. So it was the next morning we rolled in.
And what was the start of that like when you actually got into the city? So you see that everything's kind of just quiet. Do they just tell you start clearing houses?
No. So every battalion had like individual areas. So we had initially from the Cloverleaf to just a little bit past the Hydra Mosque, and like on this part, like the north part of the city. So there was a main road that ran through. So you had the Cloverleaf here, and then you had this main road that runs through. And up until that point, like we had just a little, like I said, we had just a little bit past the Hydra Mosque from here, and we're just supporting wherever company that we need support. So originally, I was tasked with LAR, or the Light Arm Reconnaissance Unit, and we got attached to them. So we would just go around and support whoever needed it for like cordon search or whatever. So while the riflemen were going house to house, I was sitting on the outside waiting to bring the pain. That was my job.
And do you remember the first time you had to bring the pain?
Yeah, so we were doing, we had pulled up, we were just outside. It was like the soccer complex or something like that. It was like just a big open field, and we're, right across the road is like a bunch of shops and like auto shops. There's the standard like roll-up garages, right? So it's just a roll-up garages and different signs and all that stuff. And we're sitting there, and again, just like, man, this is weird. Like, what are we doing? Sure enough, RPG, wow, right by my left ear. Like all the other, because they had another vehicle in front of me, and I knew where the RPG came from, but everyone else buttoned up, and I'm on a Mark 19. My vehicle gets shot, like the front driver's side wheel gets shot. So the guy in front of me is buttoned up, so I swing my turret, and I lay 48 rounds right in front of him. Like, just right in there. They were like, what are you doing? I was like, he was buttoned up, he was clear, I knew how to shoot overhead, and I was like, screw it, shot it. And they were like, okay, cool. And then we didn't get any more contact the rest of that day. Don't know what happened, but they got 48 rounds in return. 48 rounds of high explosive dual purpose grenades. So, I mean.
Wow. So talk us through the rest of what you remember about being there. Because I know that when we had talked originally, you talked about how much of that stays in your mind and it stays fresh.
Yeah.
What else sticks out about your time there?
A lot of it, you can never really get rid of a smell, because eventually, like, the town started smelling like death. Like, you knew. Like, there's a dead body here, dead body there. People are coming back, and they're like, okay, I don't know this person. No, this is my loved one. Why is this? And all that other stuff. But, yeah, the biggest thing that you always remember is the smell, and it brings you right back to where you were. It's one of those things you just can't shake. And a lot of the things like memories, it's like some of the conversations you had with some of your buddies, or like some of the things that you knew you were doing. Like I said, being in a vehicle team was really unique in the sense that like you build that extreme closeness with somebody. When it starts raining, they're like, I remember Glenn getting pissed off because it was raining, and he's like, rain's getting on him, and he's just trying to stay warm. And I'm in the turret, freezing my ass off, going like, what do you want me to do, dude? Like, or Sergeant Poulter telling every 2 seconds, telling us stories about his wife, Kate. What's one time me and Kate did this? And not to mess with Poulter too much, but he would always mention his wife, which that was his way to cope with what he was doing, right? So he's talking about Kate, talking about Kate, and all of us are like, this Kate story, like another Kate story, like seriously. But yeah, just like, it was just, that's one of those things that you don't forget. Like, you're there with your, who later become like, me and Glenn we're good buddies, and every time he mentions me to someone who's never met me, he's like, this is the guy that saved my life. Because, if I hadn't kicked him during that mortar attack, like they would have bracketed and got it together and got it right. But because, I was like, shit, we got to go. Like, I saved all those guys' lives. And it's not like I'm like, oh, we saved all their lives. Like, I don't mean it like that, but I did the right thing at the right time for the right reasons. And if I hadn't made that call or made that decision, even as a lance corporal, like, we'd have been screwed. So things like that is like the biggest thing that stand out.
Do you remember any other close calls in the house to house?
Yeah. I stupidly took off my shoulder pads. So I had the old school Interceptor flak jacket, which we weren't showering regularly. Surprise, surprise. We weren't showering regularly, so wearing those shoulder pads and the varying temperatures between being cool at night, warm in the day, wearing just a standard, cami blouse, like, you start getting like your elbow or like not your elbow, but your armpits start getting rubbed raw because of the Kevlar that's inside there. And the day I get hurt, because whatever reason, I take them off because I can't stand them. It's rubbing me raw. It's hurting. Like, fuck this. This has got to go. So I take them off. No one cares up until that point. No one cares. And they're like, hey, we need you to breach these gates. Okie dokie. So I'm breaching these gates, and sure enough, like, they're all metal gates. I don't take into account like the casualty radius doubles when you're shooting metal. So I take one in the shin, I take one in the shoulder, which I still have them here. And I get told by actually by Poulter, he's like, hey man, you're bleeding. I was like, what? And I'm like laughing. Thankfully, Doc has this recorded for whatever reason he's recording. But he's telling me, hold up, hey man, you're bleeding pretty good. And I was like, hand Doc your IFAK. I'm like, all right, cool. So I hand him my IFAK, I get back at it, and I'm taking another one in the shoulder. Happens. Like, this is stupid. Like, of all days, I take off my shoulder pads, I take one in the shoulder. Like, nothing else has happened up until this point. But today, yeah. So just one of those things you just gotta laugh at. Yeah, we have all kinds of weird things that happened. Like, it just shit happens. That's kind of the way you look at it.
Yeah, tell us about
So I mean, between that and searching houses, finding, like I was telling you guys earlier, like finding traditional like British Maxims, which for their audience, like if it's a British Maxim, it's full nude, and you're like, why is this in Iraq? Or like finding things that you wouldn't expect in an Iraqi's wardrobe, like, or at least an Iraqi female's wardrobe, like thong underwear and all that stuff. You're like, okay, this exists here. Like, what am I really fighting? Like, you left with that like level of confusion. Like, okay, who are these people really, legitimately? And yeah, it just gets really confusing, some of those stuff. Yeah, I mean, I remember I really do remember being up in that turret a ton. Those boots are probably my third or fourth set of boots I got while I was in Iraq, because I was just wearing them out because standing on the turret or standing on that platform so much, it just grabbed down the boots. It's like, I need a new pair. They end up being slicks. Small things like sleeping on the ammo cans, utilizing that Kevlar for a pillow, like things like that. Yeah.
Did you feel like you had like like you're talking about how you're learning, how Americanized almost that some of the people were there? Did you feel like there was like just a general dislike or hatred for their people, obviously for the insurgents, the people that were trying to kill you, but just in general, I mean, you haven't been there that long. This is like a relatively new urban experience, this combat. Is this a situation where you just, you almost have a total dislike for these people in general?
No, not at all. Actually, quite different. The interaction between us and just the standard populace was actually quite good. They obviously had that weird level of understanding where like they don't understand you and you don't understand them. But when you end up getting to that point where like we kind of understood why each other were there, it was like we had for the most part, I could tell that from from my interactions and what I heard from my buddies, like interaction with local citizens wasn't bad at all. It's when we met, the mujahideen or the terrorists or the paid guys that just wanted to be there to kill Americans. That's when we had issues. Otherwise, everything else was status quo. And it was strange because you're like, it's portrayed that they hate us, they hate us, they hate us. And you get to that point and you're like, they don't actually hate us. Only this small group of people hate us.
So you're saying that they were having you dismount and go into the houses and stuff too?
Yeah.
Anything wild happen in any of those?
Nah.
Was that like a interesting experience at least?
Yeah, it was because it was nothing we trained for.
Really?
Like we did a very small amount of mount training, and that was it. So there was no like, hey, we're getting you like set to go for like house to house or anything like that. It was like,
right.
Hey, we need to do this, and you're like, okay, I guess we can.
One of the things I wanted to bring up was the insurgents that you were running into and where they were from, and if you remember any of the stuff relating to that.
Yeah, so the insurgents were, funny enough, is they weren't necessarily just Iraqis. They were from like all over. So it wasn't like it just needed to be like this group, this group, this group. Like we had people from like Chechnya. So like back in the day, for those who knew who he was Juba. He's a 15 or 16-year-old Chechen sniper that loved killing Marines. Well, he ended up dying in Iraq, thankfully. He died in Iraq because, for what I believe is a Spectre gunship after he was shooting at me. I thought it was him. I'm pretty sure it was him. Not 100% sure, but yeah.
Tell us that story.
So, a lot of things when we were especially starting to work out of like the fire station or with LAR particularly, like we would do a lot of nighttime patrols. It was easier to do vehicle patrols at night, and no one's expecting a heavy gun rolling through the city at night. They're just not. And not to mention it was easier because the dogs had become rabid. On top of the dogs become rabid, the insurgency was putting IEDs in dogs. So it got to the point where any dog we saw, we had to euthanize because we didn't know. So yeah, we're doing nighttime patrols, and my driver's going out towards the Cloverleaf, and then there's this huge field in front of the hospital that there was nothing there. So just huge field, we stop, we back up to it, and I'm just hearing these rounds crack over my head. Well, I could hear the C-130 gunship floating over. I'm like, okay, well, I'm just gonna sit down, and I slump down in my turret, make sure my overhead's good, and I could just hear these rounds whizzing over my head. It was like crack, whiz, crack, whiz. So I know it's like right there. Spectre gunship picks up on it, and it's like kaboom! And I just sit there, just waiting. No more crack, whiz. All right, I can stand up and continue on with the rest of the night. But I mean, there's numerous stories of them shooting at us from mosques or the minarets next to the mosque, where they're like, dude, the mosque is supposed to be a holy place. We were told not to shoot them up, but once you made it a combative space, that was it. I mean, we dropped so much ordnance on mosques, and they knew we weren't supposed to shoot at them, but they shot at from us, and what do you want us to do? You kind of force our hands. So yeah, a lot of times that happened. As far as the insurgents per se, they were all over. I just mentioned Juba real quick, and I mean, you had Somalis, you had Filipinos, you had anyone who could speak the Muslim language was showing up to kill Americans. I mean, granted, it's not to be callous, but it was like fine by us because I mean, obviously we were there to, do our jobs. But it was just really strange that all this microcosm of people from all over the world, not just Iraq, not just the Middle Eastern world, but literally all over the world was just coming here to shoot Marines. And not so much like, and not to discount any of the Army guys that were there with us, because we had tanks and we had 2 battalions of Army guys, but where I was at near the Cloverleaf, I didn't see any Army guys except when they rolled in tanks and M111 APCs. Like, I never saw any Army. It was just Marines. So.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about, at least in Fallujah?
Yeah, like, it was, I guess going back to the insurgencies, like, they were getting paid with U.S. currency, which obviously that seems really weird, but at the time, like, that had the most value across the world. It had the best exchange rate, and dudes would get paid there. So like we would hit a car, or like we, dispatch the insurgents or whatever you want to call it, like, and we'd search the vehicle and we'd find U.S. currency. We'd go into a house, we would find, if it's a known house that we've had insurgents, U.S. currency, and like, it was known they were getting paid in U.S. dollars. Does that make me feel better about my money going across the world? Absolutely not. But it was the currency that had the best exchange rate. So seeing U.S. dollars and knowing we had to turn it over to the powers that be, you're like, this is kind of messed up. 50, 60, 70, $100,000 at a time. And you're like, this is kind of screwed up. Like, this is wrong. Yeah. For what they were doing, and as brutal as they were to killing people, and God forbid you sympathize with America or anything like that, like, for them to have U.S. currency is just like, you guys are full of shit. And that's really the moral of the story on that one is just, a lot of the Muslim world talks this big game, and not to denigrate any of the people who are Muslim out there, but a lot of the Muslim world, especially in this freedom fighter, true believer aspect, want to believe all these X, Y, and Z things outwardly, but inwardly they're no different than you and I. They're flawed human beings. Just be a flawed human being. You have your beliefs, you have your believies, okay, that's fine. But don't try to, enforce the world on your believies. Like, it's not necessarily right. That's what you want to do. You want to find a like-minded group. Hey, that's fine, whatever. But don't kill people, and they want to make it this whole religious and all this other aspect of it, and it's just not that.
Did your the group that you were with most of the time, did your guys lose anybody while you were there?
So my company lost Richard Slocum. He was actually the first person in my battalion to get killed. He actually got killed in the vehicle rollover. So the base we were at outside of Camp Fallujah, on Camp Fallujah, but not in, whatever. We ended up naming that Camp Slocum. So Richard P. Slocum, he was actually one of the guys not pictured in my picture that doesn't exist, where I was underage drinking. He was one of the guys that in Cat 1 that, we would hang out with and talk shit to. Funny enough, a story about him, like the last time I saw him, he liked playing the nut tap game. So like, he had unhooked my holster, and I had a pistol. So I had a pistol and rifle as part of my like on-person weapons. And he had unhooked my pistol, and he was trying to grab it, and I gave him a nut tap. That's part of the game. Like, this is the game. This is what we're playing. And he was like, "Oh man, I'm gonna get you back." And unfortunately, he was never able to. So, yeah, he was a fun guy. Like, he was a really good dude. Like, you get to a unit, and there's always that like weird like situation where you're like, Who is this guy? Is he cool? Is he not? And Slow was just cool. He didn't care who you were. He didn't care what you wanted to do. Like, he's cool. So, yeah. But we also lost, at least in my company, we lost Sean Marr. We had left Fallujah by that point, and we were working out of a small fob out of HIT, just on the outside of HIT. It was like an old school or whatever. It's like a 3-story. Actually, for what it was really nice. It was like a 3-story building. Like, first time I had slept indoors in months. So I was like, this is fancy. I'm living high dollar. This is some kind of highfalutin establishment. No, I'm kidding. So we're actually staying inside, and like we go to the chow hall. The chow's outside, but like you go get your chow, you go sit and all that stuff. But then you can go back inside. We lost Sean after we lost the helicopter on the way up. So we were doing patrols and all that stuff, and well, I guess I should go back. So after leaving Fallujah, we had moved up to working outside of Al Asad. So Al Asad kind of got crowded, kind of got busy. So we ended up trying to find more work to do. So we started running operations out of Al Asad, out of a fob outside of HIT. So we're running these operations, and one night, the 81 millimeter mortar platoon, for whatever reason, is running mounted patrols. No biggie, but they're running mounted patrols, and they take AK fire, AP rounds go through the door where Sean was, and he ends up dying. Yeah. So it was kind of wild to think like they were actually bringing out AP rounds, because our whole assumption was that they were shooting ball. No thought at any point in time alluded to saying like, hey, they had AP rounds or anything like that. And not saying that's a bad intel package, because we worked off what we had at the time, but I mean, the armor was just trash on those vehicles. Half door, little cutout things that, yeah, it was nice to be able to put a gun out of it, but having an exceptionally cold winter in Iraq that time was like, dude, this sucks. Not just for the cold aspect, but there's like, this sucks, it's cold, and there's still no protection. So I don't know. It was kind of one of those like, you do what what you can with it, but it's still kind of shitty. Yeah.
And then what was the rest of your Iraq deployment like?
The rest of the deployment wasn't terrible. I was a little jaded by the time we got to Al Asad, and we were like getting ready to rip out and go home and all that stuff, and just seeing how like the air wing guys or the supply guys living in Al Asad, they're having like fight nights and dance nights and all this MWR bullshit, and you're there like, I just got a shower. Like that was one of those things. It's like, I get it. You guys need to have some sort of comfort. You guys have a PX. Okay, whatever. That's not a big deal. But to have like salsa night, or to have like, King of the Ring, and then just standard non-deployed living, like things going on. It's just like, what are you guys doing? Yeah, they're out there. They support us. They fix a helicopter. They do this, blah, 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 right? But there's that disconnection, even at that far away, like this disconnection, like the war's not here, but you're in Iraq. And that's one of those things. It's just like, that goes back to like kind of faulty leadership, at least in my mind. Like, if you guys have the time to think about like having a salsa night to make sure that morale is good, you guys are missing the mission. And I get it. Marine Corps was like mission first, troop welfare second, and I get it for that understanding, that limited scope. But troop welfare in that sense is like, you guys don't need to be going out there dancing. Like, that's not why we're here. You know, you guys have a job to do. If you need to have creature comforts to, you know, blow off steam, I get it. You guys have a gym, you know, phones and whatever, internet, yada yada, whatever. You have all that stuff. But to kind of flaunt it when the grunts are there, to like for you guys to be doing all this shit, it's kind of fucked, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, you know, we just lost a ton of Marines. Over 30 Marines in particular. It's like, you guys are just dicking off. Like, no, that's wrong. It's just wrong. But yeah, it's the whole Iraq experience was just absolutely unique. The Marines actually did, the Marine Corps itself actually did a 20-year thing where they were talking about, you know, all the units and stuff like that. And my buddy, he's like I said, Sergeant Major Peter Sayal, he made a really good point to say, like, we knew we were changed, but we just didn't know. And anyone I talked to that had gone to Fallujah, or like anyone I still talk to in my peer group or my friend group or anything like that, it's really interesting to understand how different we all are, even just from the regular Marines. And not to, you know, talk bad about them at all, but, you know, because our experience was absolutely unique. But the Fallujah experience was just, it makes you different. I feel like it kind of hardens people. You know, I work with it by compartmentalizing, training jiu-jitsu, and, you know, trying to stay kind of relevant with my friend groups. But professionally, it is what it is. Like, sometimes, you know, like, it becomes, you know, what I do in my professional career. Like, with the active shooter stuff, it's like, it is what it is. And, you know, I need to go ahead and stop the threat. Do I care if it's a 15-year-old kid with a gun, or do I care if it's a 29-year-old man with a gun? No, I don't. And to have that understanding, or to have that switch per se, doesn't make me that psychopathic person. It just, I see bad, I have to address bad. And it becomes that weird, well, how can you do that? It's wrong. You know, you understand that the morality of things even more so than you normally would. So having that experience and having that, you know, I guess that not so normal aspect of life happen to you, or be a part of it, at least for that aspect of my life, it has set me up properly. In other aspects of life, it's made things difficult. Like, you know, I'm a single guy. Like, I don't have good relationships, you know. To teach my son everything that he needs to learn about, like, my experience, not that he needs to know the nitty gritty. He still doesn't understand the relevance of combat. And granted, he's 13, but he doesn't understand the relevance of combat. He thinks war is more like a game, like you win or you lose. And I'm not saying that everyone loses in war, but you have to lose something. You know? Not that you just lose your life or anything like that. You lose parts of yourself. And granted, yeah, you can get back and all that other stuff, and there's, you know, other ways to get through it, and therapy and strangle therapy is a really good thing, but there's still parts of you that's different from everybody else. You see things differently. You're just a different person. You can be harder, colder, whatever you want to call it. You're just different. You know, it's hard for people to understand, and people have a really hard time understanding people who've been to combat, especially urban combat, because they think what they see on TV is that's it. You don't go through anything else. You never leave. Like I said earlier, like, There's a picture out there, someone wrote it years and years ago, it says Fallujah will be a part of you forever, and I mentioned that earlier. It will. 100% will. I mean, 6 months after I got back from Fallujah, or sorry, that first deployment, I went on another deployment and went to Afghanistan. We didn't get messed with because we were the Fallujah Marines. I mean, it had enough weight to go into another country for the insurgency or the Taliban or whoever to say, yeah, we're not messing with those guys. It's kind of a bold statement, you know. Combat changes you. And it doesn't have to be like, you know, what some of your other interviews have said. Like, it's not a death sentence, it's a redefinition of who you are. And people kind of have that weird stigma or aspect to it. Like, okay, well, you know, I'm messed up. Everyone's messed up. You know, everyone's messed up. Everyone has something fucked up that happens to them. Mine was combat. But I wouldn't change it for the world.
Really? Talk about that.
It helped me be a clearer person. So understanding the how unique of a male experience combat is, because there's really two experiences that are particularly males, especially younger males, look for, and that's combat and fucking. That's it. That's what two males look for mentally. And to have that experience in combat, it's like, okay, I understand. I understand the fragility of life. I understand how important life has become. It makes me a little bit wiser. I don't run into things blindly, especially when I'm at work. I don't bust into a house just because, you know, obviously rules being the rules, and especially with a warrant. I slow everything down. I work to make sure everything's clear, concise. You know, radio communication, you work with brevity and things like that. Like, you have to work inside those parameters, and it has to be wire tight because that's the way it has to be, so I can go home and hang out here in my house. Like, it has to be that way. And I think combat has redefined and clarified that in that sense, is like, things have to be the way because, not to quote Tommy Lee Jones, but Marines have rules, right? No, kidding. We live by a code, no kidding. But there are rules to it, right? So it's like you have to give, you know, those dangerous situations to garner that respect. And if I didn't do that and I didn't experience combat like that, I wouldn't have had that respect. I've been still out here being this dumbass kid, just kind of bouncing around life until I figured it out. Well, I got that out of the way.
What do you think the major difference is between, like you were just saying, guys that have seen combat and guys that have seen urban combat?
Urban is, it's the 540 world, and you have to live in two different elevations. So you have to think everything in 540 degrees, but I have to think not just at, like, you know, this 100-foot level of where I'm at. I need to look at the 3,000-foot level as well. Like, I've cleared this area, I need to be here, or this is the next part of my objective. Like, okay, I need to get from point A to point B. How do I do it? And I have to have that thought process. It becomes this really, really intense game of hide and seek. To break it down, like really Barney style here, this is an intense game of hide and seek where the person that's hiding from me is trying to kill me. Like, that's the difference, or at least that's what my perception of urban conflict is. Whereas open air, the rules are a little bit looser, right? I have terrain to my advantage. I have time. I have distance, typically, like, to my advantage or to my disadvantage, depending on the situation, right? But I don't have to think as far ahead, or I don't have to have as many checkpoints I need to think about as I do in urban. Urban's just, you're on edge the entire time, and you're going to get worn out real quick. because you're sitting there red line on adrenaline, and then you get done with your patrol, you get done with your search, you get to your point where you need to be, and then dudes are falling down and taking a nap because you're cashed out. I mean, I don't recall being anywhere near as exhausted in Afghanistan as I was in Iraq. Like nowhere near it. And we're doing route patrols, and we're driving back and forth from Jalalabad to Asadabad, and Asadabad back to Jalalabad, picking up equipment, picking up people, just back and forth. And I don't remember being nearly as tired. Yeah, I was tired, but nowhere near as tired.
Was there anything in the Afghanistan deployment that you wanted to go through, as far as where you were and any experiences that you had there?
So Afghanistan was interesting. We didn't really get, like I said, we didn't really get messed with because they knew we were the Fallujah Marines. So I got into two troops in contact, 2 gunfights while I was there, and that was it. A couple other guys got in some other gunfights, but not battalion wise. Like no one really got anything major. It was just kind of chill. I mean, they were trying to put IEDs towards the end of the deployment, but nothing really major happened in Afghanistan. We ended up driving up to Korangal, which was interesting, snapping half shafts and watching a Humvee brake trying to go up a hill. Doesn't do well, especially the fully up armored. They're so heavy that the torque on the half shaft snaps the half shaft. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so the differential in the tire, there's just too much rotation and too much friction on the ground because the roads are so unimproved. Half shaft snaps. Boom. And they shatter. They'll snap and then they'll just hang. Or they'll break at the CV boot and they'll just hang.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you actually, I thought it was interesting too. You talked about in 2011 when you were when the typhoon happened.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about that story?
Yeah. So my third deployment, my third and last deployment, because I had taken a few years off. I had gone to Quantico and went teaching at TBS.
What is that?
So TBS is the basic school. So it's where every Marine officer learns how to be a basic rifleman, or not basic rifle platoon commander. Excuse me. They have to go to that school. So like, if you went to do just your standard track, you go to college, you go to officer candidate school, and then you go to the basic school or officer candidate course. So officers spend most of their entire time becoming Marine officers on Quantico. On just 2 different sides of the base. Unless you go to the academy or you did like the platoon leaders course. But excuse me. So I went there. I was there for about 3 years. Ended up having shoulder surgery twice. One to get the shrapnel removed, and then one to get my shoulder actually repaired. But that's where I started really noticing like differences in personality. It got to a point when I was there that the students I was teaching were younger than I was, which wasn't like I was terribly old, but I was starting to get younger. We're starting to get older than the ones coming through. And then just having the Iraq experience and all that other stuff we started bringing that barrier in communication as the generation started to shift. Like, so tail end of my generation, it's like people are starting to get, I guess the easiest way to say is softer. So like you make corrections as an instructor and they're like, "You don't say that to me, Sergeant." You're like, "Dude, fuck off. You're here to learn. Like, this is the job. Like, it is what it is." But that's where I started seeing some of that parts of like my difference in psyche. But yeah, that was an interesting experience. Made a lot of good connections there. Worked for a lot of different people who were Fallujah vets, which was like, it made that time there pretty interesting. I'll tell a funny story. Like when I first checked in, I was a corporal there. And for ladies here in the room, I understand how you feel, especially when like dudes are staring at your chest. Because I checked in, I had 2 combat actions. So on a combat action, we have the Marine Corps just gives you a star. So like you get a star for second award. On your combat action, and I checked in, and the instructor battalion first sergeant, the combat instructor company first sergeant was staring at my combat action like intently to the point where I was like, I had to actually lean down. I was like, hey, I'm down here. And I had to go get checked in by the gunnery sergeant, who I think he had been to Iraq. He hadn't been to Afghanistan, so he was just kind of like treating me kind of shitty because I was like, I had two campaigns and 2 combat action ribbons. It was like, but he was kind of talking to me kind of shitty, and I didn't have a good relationship with that guy anyway, so it was fine. But yeah, I had done my 3 years there, left Quantico, and then went to 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines in Camp Pendleton. And my last deployment was on another 31st MU, which ended up jumping on the tsunami relief for the Tomodachi. That was weird, and I will say that was super weird because getting on the ship and then obviously having the ship experience, which is kind of awful. Yeah, having dudes walk on like civilian guys walking around with Geiger counters going like with acceptable levels of radiation. You're like, this is fucked. Like, I'm not even that close to it. I'm on the other side of the island with Japan, and it's like we're getting radiation in the water. And then, go out and hang out in the smoke pit, and you see just a telephone pole or top of a house float in the middle of the ocean. Like, this is really fucked up. Yeah, so that whole deployment was just kind of interesting. It was weird having a peacetime deployment as well as the 2 combat deployments because I felt really out of place. But around that time, I was like, I kind of knew I couldn't go back to Afghanistan. Like, my ex-wife was pregnant. Sergeant Ian Tawney had died in Afghanistan, not meeting his kid, and it's just like, there were all kinds of things going through my heart, and I was like, can I go to combat and miss my kid? Like, can I do that? Like, is that okay? Like, do you feel less of a man if you don't stay here and raise your children? Like, no. So I made a decision to end up getting out, which it was a rough road. Getting out with a loose plan is not good, and I did that. So for those who are still in, who need structure, like, make sure you have a solid plan, because once you get out and you don't have any like income coming in, waiting for that next check is terrible. Like, even if you're like sitting on a bunch of pile of money, like, have something else lined up. Like, that's the biggest piece of advice I give anyone who's getting out. It's like, have something lined up. Don't wait for your pile of money. Don't wait for any of that stuff. Have it lined up. Have it ready. If, old guys out there, you're like, hey, I'm just going to retire. Make sure you have all your stuff done. Everything's, again, lined up. Because you get out and it's just like, that's it. So you're jumping into the deep end of the pool. And you gotta learn how to swim. Yeah.
Why law enforcement?
I feel like I was kind of set up for that. I had always had an interest in law enforcement. I, before I wanted to become an infantryman, I was like, I want to be an MP. But I just had that calling. Like, someone needs to go to these shitty circumstances. Why not be me? And having, being at the point where I've been doing it for 9-ish years at this point, it's like the job is the job. And the only thing that gets hard is everything else around it. Whether that be getting supported by your administration, whether it gets, supported by your community, differencing, changing in laws and all that other stuff. Like, the job is the job. People still need the police. People still need someone to, as corny as it sounds, to save them. Right? And people still need to go to jail. Having that time in the Marine Corps, having that experience when doing what I was doing, and snatching people up, or getting conflicts, like, it's kind of set up for it. So that's why I picked it. I don't think I could be a firefighter.
Is there anybody you want to shout out before we get wrapping this up, or is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think we did the Battle of Fallujah reunion with all the battalions through the Semper Fi Fund just recently, and it was good to reconnect with people I haven't talked to in like 20 years, and like, again, I still remember their faces like from 20 years ago. But I think the biggest, for those who are out, who don't have their tribe, don't have any of that other stuff, find it. I got told, one of the guys, when I was a first to the unit, the one who handed me a Mickey's grenade, was like, this kid's cool, leave him alone. He ended up killing himself a few months ago. Don't, for all the vets out there, like, don't sit there and sit on that shit. If you need help, go get help. No one's too brave. No one's going to judge you. You're not weak. You're not any of this other shit. Like, go get help. For the love of God, go get help. Because even if the people that you think don't love you, or, whatever, got shit going on and all that stuff, people out there, especially your brothers, still love you. And it's really important for you not to just do something so fucking selfish and hurt everybody else because you're hurting. So that's one of those things. Like, I get it, veteran suicide's a thing, but super preventable. Like, Morgan was a good dude. I haven't talked to him in years and years and years. Hell, I don't even know what happened to him after he got out. Like, and that's kind of shame on me for not trying to keep track with all these guys, but we drift, we grow apart, but not a day goes by where most guys, especially me, I don't think about my brothers. Social media is a beautiful thing in that aspect, where like I can see what they're doing. A lot of the guys I grew up with in the Marine Corps, like, they train jiu-jitsu now, which pretty telling here. I'm trying to sell jiu-jitsu. Everyone out there, go train. Do something. Find that tribe. Find that outlet. It's not for you to sit there and do it alone. If it's because you fucked up somewhere, just own your fuck ups, continue on, and then let's move on. Like, just, it's not worth you killing yourself over. It's really not. And having, been on both sides, just the veteran and the law enforcement side, I can tell you 100%, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. Because you're hurting somebody else way worse than you ever hurting. So, I guess that's my little piece there.